So it's my pleasure to chair the first panel of the summit this afternoon with a title of How Do We Get There From Here? It's an interesting question because it presupposes two things. One, that we know where we're at, and two, that we know where we want to be. I'm not sure I have confidence in the answer to either one of those questions, but I'm sure the panelists will. On the panel this afternoon, it's my pleasure to introduce, first of all, on the far end, Paula Caligiuri, a colleague, a distinguished professor of international business here at the DeMoore-McKim School of Business, and someone who has spent a good portion of her career in academia researching the challenges of leading when you're not there in various contexts, and is currently involved in a very fascinating initiative that she's launched here, but I'll let her tell you more about that. Immediately next to her is Eivind Slaaen from Hilti, and he has a great title. Every time I look at that title, I think, oh, the things I could do with a title like that. He is the head of People and Culture Development. And finally, to my immediate right is Dave DeFilippo, who's Chief Learning Officer for Suffolk Construction. For those of you in the Boston area, you may be familiar with Suffolk Construction. I know them because on the other side of the railroad tracks, they're building a new science building for Northeastern University. Prior to moving to Suffolk, he was with BNY Mellon, and he brings a particular perspective of two different organizations wrestling with this question in some different ways. Without further ado, I want to jump right into the panel. We have an objective within this panel of looking at what are the biggest challenges and opportunities around leading when you're not there. And I think Martha laid some out, and I think this panel will explore those further. Additionally, I do want to explore the question of how do we know when we're there? And how do we get there? How do we help our managers get there? So we're going to start. I've asked each of the panelists to give them a brief introduction about themselves, and in that context, help us better understand where they're coming from and their background and what they can, what perspective they bring to this. And then I will, from there, ask each of them to respond to a specific question. But first, some fuller introductions. Paula, get us started.
All right. Well, thanks, Alan. Hi, everyone. I am happy to be here. My area of expertise is that I study really what makes people effective living and working internationally, what makes people comfortable working in different cultures and with people from different countries. And very specifically, I was interested in the kind of things that we take with us when we go to work, whether we're working virtually or working in another context, another culture. Things like our personality, our background, our experience, the types of things we've done in our career and in our past. I'm also very interested in how we develop cross-cultural competencies from deep developmental experiences. So how do we change and grow as a function of going on an international assignment or working on a global team or whatnot? The project that Alan mentioned that I'm most excited about right now is that I'm working on how to use international corporate volunteerism to help leaders, executives build cross-cultural competencies. So we've just launched a program for corporate executives where we convene a group, either they're high potential leaders or global leaders. We allow them to come together as a team, so they themselves are a global team, and then we place them into an NGO to work on a project for a fixed amount of time. And what we're finding is that it's been wonderfully developmental for building cross-cultural competency. So I'm very excited about that, happy to talk to anybody about it. So thanks.
Okay, thank you. Eivind?
So I'm working with Hilti, and this is a company based out of Liechtenstein. I learned over lunch today that the university has about 25,000 students. Liechtenstein has like 36,000 people in total. But we are worldwide, and we are a privately held, family-owned company. And the topic around culture, corporate culture, has been key in the company since the very beginning. We've done like culture trainings for more than 30 years. We run a very structured process. We call it our culture journey since 12 years. We have a regular series of workshops with people globally and also vertically, where we discuss about our performance and the behavior behind the way we need to take this next. And I think that's been one of the things for us when we get into topics we're discussing here as giving us a good foundation to build on, and maybe helps us to do things easier in certain aspects. It's also one key topic for us when we recruit people into the topic, to the company, clearly that the linkage and alignment on values, which becomes a little bit challenges where you also want to open yourself up and become a little bit more diverse to make sure that you're not too strict to yourself. Myself, I worked and lived in Europe and US. I've been in a global role for the last 7 years. And I think what I find interesting is when you get into topics like we're discussing here, to on the one side understand it and the complexity behind it, but then try to find ways to take out the complexity, to make it simple and pragmatic, because by the end of the day, I think the things you remember, the things you do when you need to do them, and we'll probably talk more about that later on. And when you look into things happening on a global scale, there's a lot of diversity and differences in there. But I think when we dig a little bit deep and look at the underlying principles, there's a lot of common element as well. And without that, it probably wouldn't be doable in the first place.
Okay, thank you. Dave?
Yeah, well, I'm delighted to be here today. And Alan and I first started talking about this past spring when I was with my prior company, the bank in York Mellon. So I kind of switched it up on him, didn't let him know, said, hey, would you still want to have me at the conference? And luckily he did. So Alan, thank you for that. But I've been at Suffolk Construction for 12 weeks, and it's the first time in my career that I've been with a national firm, which puts a little bit of a different spin on the panel for me. I've spent the last 20 plus years in global firms, really grappling with the same issues that I think everyone on the panel has teed up. And I think in this context, what's been interesting to me in this transition is the fact that I've gone from a company of 50,000 employees globally distributed to a national firm with 1,200 employees, and over, people keep asking me, "What? You were at a bank. Isn't it different here?" And I'm here to tell you that the issues around human capital, the issues around relationships when they're national and virtual, they're pretty much identical. We grapple with the same things that we would grapple with in a 50,000 person company. And I think the gentleman in the prior session that teed up the idea of leadership is leadership, and the model can transcend if you're global or just talking about really good leadership practices, kind of teed it up really nicely for us. So thank you.
Okay. Eivind, let me start with you. In my conversation with you earlier, you indicated that your philosophy about how to lead when you're not there is summed up in 2 questions. The first question is, how would I normally do this? And then the second question is, how do I need to adapt? Would you mind sharing some of your perspective and what happens when you ask those 2 questions?
Yeah, I think the thing comes from a belief in that the only thing that really works is the things that are simple and you can remember. Because when you're in the middle of it, you're not going to go back and look up things. Mm-hmm. And I think if we find a way to describe things in a way that you stop and you think about a few things before you actually go out doing it, I think you almost half on the path to a successful way. So if the natural thing is if the things you have to do, the what's, so to speak, they're pretty much the same, just as Dave was saying before, whether you're global or local. Those things you have to do, and also what Martin refers to, those things will be the same whether you're now working together with people or more in a virtual setting with people. Now, and then, so his first thing said, so what do I do now? And if you work with a virtual team, the first thing, and probably also the most difficult task you have as a leader, is to gain alignment with your team on what you're supposed to do in the first place. And if you ask yourself the question, what would I normally do to gain alignment and go through that process, you then have to add the filters on. How does, the way I'm used to do it, will that work here? Mm. In a sense, either I'm dealing with different diversity aspect, gender, generation, or a global diversity, or I'm actually dealing with people in a virtual setting. And if you ask that question, either I realize I have an answer to that, and then I can adapt accordingly, and if not, and if still have time, I may ask a few people for it, and if not, I may even involve my people into how do we then go about doing it together. And I think if we start getting into asking this type of question, then a lot of things, the burden you have on your shoulder is off, because you can also involve your people differently and then start engaging them. And I think that's what I've seen is when you start talking to people about that, then they feel sort of released, because it may not be as complex as I thought it would be in the first place. And then you prevent them from either going out and doing exactly the way you always done it and then ends with disaster, or we never get started because you think it's far too complex.
Okay, thank you. Paula, you've researched and written extensively on global leaders and global competencies and effectively managing people in global settings. And you've worked closely with a number of global corporations. What do you see as the biggest challenges that organizations confront in addressing that question of leading when not there?
I think there's two sets of challenges that are happening. One is around investment, and the other is around talent management. So the investment issue, I think, is really around technology. What kind of technology are we going to get? What's the next big thing that we can do, whether it's telepresence or great collaborative technology? What can we buy to make our folks great at this? Where are we investing? Did you know, like, telepresence now, you can make yourself into a robot. For $2,500, you can buy a robot that will make you... Is anyone a Big Bang Theory fan? Yeah, okay. You remember when Sheldon turned himself into a robot? You can buy that for yourself. It's fantastic. But you can get these things now. We have technology out there. We can invest in it. I'm seeing companies with challenges around investing in training, so that the types of things, Eivind, that you discussed, how do you integrate different ways of working, and can we do that? Companies are getting better at providing the training to help people work virtually, lead virtually, and the like. But then there's that investment in face time. And I think that, too, is really important for establishment of trust. And all of those are financial decisions, and they're all so critical. So I think one part of it is investment. The other part of it is really human talent issues. Around, we've got a new reality for how we work and how we work with each other. The types of people who can work in a virtual environment might be different than the types of people we've hired. Maybe we'll need new types of individuals to go into the pipeline, people who are more comfortable working independently, people who are more autonomous, people who are a little more self-starters, people who can work without having a leader over his or her shoulder. So I think we do have an HR, a talent management issue, as well as an investment one.
Okay. Thank you. Dave, you mentioned that you recently moved from a global corporation to a national or regional company, and you mentioned that you saw a lot of similarities in the challenges. One of the things that we see, that we often talk about on the academic side, is that the competencies that leaders develop, the managers develop in that global context, can be applied in a non-global context, in more of a domestic setting. I'd be interested in your observations with regard to that. You mentioned that the challenges are the same. Are the competencies, and specifically what sorts of competencies might be the same?
Yeah, so it's been really interesting in the last 12 weeks to kind of think about the similarities and the differences. And you mentioned FaceTime, Paula, right? So things like FaceTime, time zones, regional cultures, how to manage those realities, right, are true whether you're global or whether you're national. And I've been doing a fair amount of traveling to pretty much every region that we're in and every job site. So even within regions, there are what I would refer to as job site cultures based on the type of work being done. And so a couple of examples that I would just share with you is that I think there are kind of three big things that I've seen. So the first one is disconnection is a risk. And when you think about whether you're in a corporate role and you're trying to communicate to the regions globally or nationally, ensuring that your employees feel like they're connected. So to your presentation, Martha, as a way to stay engaged. So I'll tell you a quick story that's a good example of this. So when I was in my last role at BNY Mellon, to avoid the sense of disconnection, we focused on collaboration. The team I led as part of our university was 200 people around the world. So I did a very, very simple thing. The team had just come together for the first time. It was a new organizational structure. We'd gone from being highly decentralized to centralized. And I said to everyone, so whether it's by a telephone call or an email or using your link, face-to-face virtual Skype monitoring, I want everyone to go meet 5 people. And that's all I want you to do. Meet 5 of your colleagues, have a conversation, share some personal things, learn about what each person does, and immediately the sense of collaboration in our team increased very, very quickly. The second thing I would talk about is culture. So as an example, I'm in a new company with a very, very strong founder-led culture, which has some really good attributes to it. It also creates some challenges. And there are the typical growth challenges any national or global firm would go through. What I've been talking to the leadership team a lot about has been the systems we put in place to perpetuate the culture and perpetuate the best parts of the culture so that we do it consistently over time and so we can expand in a way that gives us the Suffolk feel wherever we are nationally. And then the last thing I would say is that acknowledging and respecting cultural differences is a challenge. And this could be one of those things that I refer to it as translating. So it's how do we translate the message, be it from corporate to the regions, from the regions back to us, or even any type of translation as far as, I think the very good point that you made, Martha, right, around strategy, right? People say they don't understand it. Well, how do we become really good translators as leaders and managers?
Okay, thank you. As we've talked about this and also reflecting on the keynote address, the question becomes how do you develop these capabilities? If people need to understand better how to get to the essentials, as Eivind, you've pointed out, if they need to understand better how to develop that culture, how do we go about developing people to have those capabilities that can get us from here to there? And I wonder, Paula, if you could, you've done a lot of research in this area, maybe you could start off with an answer to that question.
Sure. No, this was the question I really wanted. So I think we have a lot of assumptions that we make in corporate about how people get great at being global leaders. And one of the biggest issues, I think one of the biggest assumptions that we make is that just by merely breathing the air of another country, somehow we've become globally competent. And that's not true. I'm sure we all know people who have lived and worked in another country who, frankly, are really just still bad at this. What we're learning, though, what we know, is that when we create a deep developmental experience that truly can shape an individual's hearts and mind, we can move the needle on their cross-cultural competencies. We can make them better at perspective taking and tolerating ambiguity and being humble. We know this works, but okay, so what are those experiences? Things that enable us to have peer-level interaction with people from different cultures, situations that enable us to try things out, try different ways of behaving in a culturally different context, and then get some feedback on those behaviors. A psychologically safe environment, Miriam, to your research. We need individuals who can trust one another and learn how to establish trust. I think to your point that trust, and Martha, you mentioned this, trust is established very differently in different cultural contexts. People who can get good at knowing and understanding those differences. So these different kind of features of an experience, we're smart. We can craft these experiences. They don't necessarily need to be those 2-year expat assignments. They can be great global teams or short-term experiences or international volunteerism or whatever fits with the organization. But I do think there's some knowledge that we have now about how to get folks better at this.
And Dave, I know you've designed some programs with your previous company. I wonder if you could talk about how you tackled this challenge.
Yeah, I'd say the biggest way with the different global firms I've worked with that we've tackled really having a global mindset has been with rotational assignments. So where we've sent people on expatriate assignments and really had them really ensconce themselves and really dive into the local culture. And that That works well. I'd say the other way that works well, though, sometimes, we did this a bit at my last firm, BNY Mellon, is bringing people from other countries to the corporate headquarters. Countries like India, right? So someone who could do a year rotation in India could be a career-changing opportunity for them. I'll tell you the interesting thing, though, is now, again, that I'm with a national company, we're doing the exact same thing. We're taking the Boston guy or gal and sending them to California. And it may seem like a little thing, but that culture and subculture is very different, and it's helping us both grow the business, but also create leaders across the company that are Suffolk leaders. So two different examples, but very similar outcomes.
Okay, I have to confess, I'm still thinking about 36,000 population Liechtenstein and wondering if we can get another 11,000 students at Northeastern and become a country. As you know, we had a really fascinating phone call where you talked about this, and I wonder if you could share your experiences at Hilti with growing these leaders.
Yeah, I think we do a lot of the same things. You know, believing in exposing people, and let people rotating is an important thing. I think the thing we're looking at currently, and where we're not so good yet, is that we're not designing it really as learning journeys. You know, I think we are. You give them an assignment, and a lot of what you end up doing is learning on the job. I think what we're missing is to lay that out, that when you get into a new assignment, also what do you really need to deal with in the first 3 months and then 3 to 6, and building a lot more reflection to make sure that the experience people make actually turn into learning. I think we leave a little bit that open. But I think what we're looking into dealing with the uncertain ambiguity is how do we also get leaders to be much more mindful of what is going on. And I think and I think if you get a combination of humility of leaders combined with mindfulness, I think you are up to a good recipe. Because the humility becomes that you don't need to know everything. And it's okay to ask, and it's okay to ask for support. And I think every time you ask for support, you get surprised how many people are willing to give you that support. But many times, because of hierarchy or whatever it is, it's you as a leader, I think, has to make the first step and break that sort of feeling that you're difficult to approach. And the mindfulness, I think, particularly when you're working with people in a remote setting, in a virtual setting, you don't have this feeling of sensing, smelling what's going on. And how do you then still find that information when you're having the context going on? And I think that has to do with, are you then 100% present in these moments you're dealing with people? And I think there's so much buzz going on that we have maybe a meeting, but in the back of your head, you're still dealing with some other things, and you're losing these opportunities to sense now, is this what people are saying? No, the true picture is something underlying to it. And I think that's an interesting aspect. I remember myself when we started getting into coaching and started doing coaching training, you had the feeling that means we physically together. You need to sit across, you need to observe, you need to watch body language. And then you're starting talking about, but you can do coaching on the phone. And the first moment is that's impossible. I mean, how could you do that? And then means, you have to start listening to the voice and difference in voice, and that gives you exactly the same signals as you watching body languages. But of course, that only works if you are mindful and present in the moment you're dealing with it. And I think in everything getting faster and more pressure and all these things, cutting to the bus and taking the time to be there, that's probably the best investment we can do as leaders, because then you can be on top of the issues and then leaving it. And I think those are the things we think we need to put much more emphasis on than some of the other more easy to catch type of topics.
The title of this session is, how do we get there from here? What does there look like? I know that's a step off into the great beyond. It's kind of an abstract question, and because academics deal with the abstract, Paula, I'm going to
thanks.
tee that up for you. But I'm going to expect to hear from Dave and Eivind as well.
Gee, thanks. I'll stall for you guys. How will we know when we're there?
Yeah, what does there look like?
I think there would be a place that if technology didn't go well, it just didn't matter because you fully trusted the people with whom you're working. I think those were there. I mean, we've all worked on project teams when we've worked with people from different cultures, and you so fully are engaged in trust and you know what you're working on that it just doesn't matter that the technology is not working or the communication is slow or whatever. We're there when I think we just feel good about the work that's coming out of the team that we're working with.
Ivan?
I think the ultimate is if you high performing. I think that's by end of the day. If you produce results and you get results, and I think we all been on teams where I felt like this is high performing team, and then it doesn't matter what happened in between, you can still deal with it because you're in this flow. And I think that would for me be the ultimate test. I think that's where you get the engagement. That's where the energy comes in, and whatever comes up, you feel confident we can solve it.
Dave?
Yeah, so I'll give you two examples that one is recent, and I've just learned a lot of the construction industry jargon. So pardon me if I say anything the wrong way, but we're big into lean as it comes from lean manufacturing as far as how we structure jobs and projects. So a superintendent recently said to me, the best part about lean for me is that it helps me be a better leader and manager because if we do it right, I can come to the office and meet with you, and I don't have to be there, right? So as an example, that type of process orientation really helps him kind of step into the leadership space in a bigger way. The second thing I would say is that coming from my recent job, but even now that I'm rolling out a new 3-year plan and strategy at Suffolk, is can people on the team not only get the results, but can they carry the message? And can they carry the message across borders, regionally, back and forth to corporate? And in the case of a global organization, can they do it globally? For me, that last point becomes a really important one because if they can carry the message, they can then ensure that there's congruence and alignment and integration, and ultimately that will reinforce results.
Thank you. What I'd like to do now is to open the floor for some questions, and if we have more than one, what I'll do is gather several questions, see if I can't synthesize this to be more economical with our time. So, questions from the audience. Let's start over here.
Yeah. How do you teach an executive, humility, mindfulness, be self-reflective? How do you incorporate that into the training?
And another question here.
Yeah, the focus, I think, on a lot of, at least as I've heard it, is the focus on the leader operating on this homogeneous mass called employees. I'd be interested in insights in terms of what a leader needs to do to develop employees, because they also are probably not all sitting in the same room.
Okay. Let me take one more.
Given the cost involved these days, the reluctance of two people to have serious careers, what do we do short of the long expatriate centers to develop a global mindset?
What are you short of expatriate?
Well, if you just can't afford to send a lot of people, hundreds of people abroad for 3 years.
Okay. I want to come back to this first question because it was something that you had mentioned as well, Eivind, in your comments about get executives spending more time in reflection. And I was thinking about the contradiction of I worked with Gia on a program where we were told it was a great program that we delivered. Now, if we could just deliver it in a third of the time that we had been given, it would be a really great program. So there's this tremendous concentration and pressure to get things done. In the middle of that, how do you help executives? How do you teach executives to be more reflective? And I've asked that of you specifically, Eivind, but Paula and Dave, please join in with your thoughts as well.
So the way we deal with that at Hilti is on this culture program we have, as we call it, our culture journey. We take teams through what we call a team camp on a regular basis. That's like every 2 years. and there's normally 2.5 days setting, and we forces them through a type of reflection. We always started with, we do sessions like we call brutal facts sessions. We have it started with a big mirror in the room. So this is Jim Collins. When you look in the mirror, when you look out of the window, and when you're dealing with topics, reflection, what is the customers telling you, what's the results, and what you get from your own employee opinion surveys. And now you look in the mirror because this is what you have control over. So it's not about everybody else is responsible for. So we start doing that more like an organization level, take it down to a team level, and then we take it to a personal level. And we do all types of different reflections exercises. And we've done this now for 12 years. So, what we do today is completely different than we did in the first round 12 years ago. And every time we sort of, moved the bar to it. We've done things like, we call it a pit stop letter. So we gave people, you got handed out a letter from your best friend. And he's then describing a situation about what's going on in his life. And it's more in life balance, or work-life balance type of situation. What's going on with your work, where is working, not working, things on the family side, colleagues, what you do to further do your education and stuff. So you get a letter of about 2 pages, tons of questions. You get 1 hour to write an answer. And we told people, write an answer for yourself with no limitation to it. And then we go into a sharing exercise afterwards. But you only share what you're comfortable of sharing, because it's always on do the reflection for yourself. We want to build trust in the team, and the only way you build trust in the team is by sharing. But how much you're comfortable with sharing depends on what's going, that team at that stage, and what's going on maybe else in your life. So we're always trying to find ways to make it very safe. Things we do in these sessions stays. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, obviously. And I think over time, you're starting actually building a foundation where people can open up, and you can also share some of the things which is not perfect. And I think and once you get into that mood, then there's a lot coming out of it. And you are among yourself, so it's a safe environment. You never let others into it, and so far we have never had issues that things have been told outside, because everybody understands this is as much as you get out of yourself. But I think it comes from, and we do this from very top. With our guinea pigs is always our executive boards. We then take it to the board of directors, and then we take it throughout the organization. So this is one of the things that everybody's doing in the company, and I think that's also in the sense of many times in companies you have things you design with the board who then gets done by the others, but the board is not participating into it. And I think these are the things because they have done it before, the willingness to be part of it is much higher. So the thing we're doing it's not scientific or difficult. It's very simple things, but you just have to create an environment that it's safe to do it.
All of you.
Yeah, but it was very scientific because the fundamentals of experiential learning are exactly the phases you described. It's you have the experience as an individual, as your individual managers, and then you have time to reflect on it, act on it. So it's what is the Kolb's thing? It's have the experience, then you sort of ask, what just happened, and then you have to have that reflection of, well, so what? Why did that happen? And then the next piece of it is, now what? So what do we do differently as professionals? So it was actually very scientific.
But I think what we do in a way that people don't necessarily see that.
Yeah.
So you make it a simple interface.
No, that's terrific. I think the experience part of it is also quite important. There's so much fantastic research that's coming out on how do you construct these experiences to make them truly developmental for cross-cultural competencies. I think the fact that putting people in novel situations, getting them out of their most familiar context into something, a position of novelty, giving them psychological safety. It was just such a beautiful case example, so that they can try some things out and grow. Having some feedback, peer interaction, having an opportunity to question one's assumptions. Those are really good features of these deep developmental experiences.
I guess the only thing I would add would be that I'm an ex-teacher and coach. That's how I started my career. So I think a lot about sort of training people and formerly athletes with intention so they can stand on their own. And so when I think about that in this context, I think about the assessment part that you mentioned, right? Be it 360 assessment, be it psychometric assessments to really understand kind of where you're coming from, doing that initial look in the mirror. But then creating a safe environment that has support, right? So if that safe environment is the organizational philosophy around development, and the support is an internal or external coach, I think both of those things work really well together. But even with 1 and 2, I think the key has to be that there's a commitment, right? And there's an organizational commitment and an individual commitment to then doing something. Mm-hmm. And if you do something and try it, it doesn't go well as leader the first time, that's okay, because the safety you've created will allow that person to try something again, mm-hmm. and those things will lead to practices. And those 3 things have to really be working together to really kind of change leadership behavior and raise the game in this case for global leaders.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let me follow up then with that additional question of how do leaders develop their direct reports, those that they're responsible for, and what can organizations do to nurture that, encourage that?
I think it's the same as you described. It cascaded. It's the same levels of learning, except cascaded down within the organization. So
if that behavior is modeled, that you hope that then the leaders you've developed will turn around and do that with the people they work with?
Yeah. I mean, I think your example was the best one. It started with the board. At least as I understood it, the experience that the board has was the exact same experience that was filtered all the way through, because the behaviors are the same. We still need people building trust with one another, relying on each other, feeling connected with a purpose and mission, all the things Martha said in her talk. I think that has to happen at every level. The steps
and in a period of constrained resources, how do you do that? If we can't send people on rotational assignments, if that's not within the budgets, if we don't have extensive budgets, that's certainly been one of the hallmarks, I would say, of the last 8 to 10 years, is that there's been a significant decrease in the budgets available for training and development. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but
I guess what I'd say is 2 things. I think that when you, from an organizational construct perspective, one way that I've thought about learning and kind of the accountability for learning has been in a very simple model. If you picture a triangle, and at the top of the triangle it says the employee, and then at one corner it says the manager, and the other corner it says the organization. All 3 of those things have to be working together so that the employee says, hey, I want to develop, right? I want to go to the next job, right? So they declare that, and then it's the manager's responsibility, to your question, Alan, right, to help facilitate that. And then people like me in the organization, and the organization deploys the resources for all that to happen. If that works well together, be it global leadership or any other competency, I think that's how you sync it all up. When I think about budget and challenges with budget, what I would say is this. One thing I think that people, practitioners perhaps, have maybe made excuses for is budget. And things certainly, I went through the financial crisis working in a financial firm. It was certainly tough. But I think the opportunity is to embed the development opportunities, be it global or national, into the ongoing work, right? So if you have a project that's going on, how do you take someone who's a high potential or in the upper right-hand corner of the 9 box, put them on that project, and don't think about that as an incremental expense. Think about it as a cost of just doing that project that you're already going to do, right? So embed things and just take advantage of those synergies.
We have a very simple leadership model where we say that we call it Hilti leadership, and we said the task you as a leader is just to develop people and achieve outstanding results. And then you have some discussion. So now, can I choose now what they do in certain times? Yeah. But it's really based into, we're not interested in just good results. It should be sustainable, so you get over time. And the only way you can get to that is if you really develop your people. And then we're taking that concept, laid it into our competency model we use. We put it into all the processes we have. So when you get into performance management, everybody get an individual business target, which is linked back to the strategy. You tie that to individual development targets, and you put them into the same process. You measure as leaders on those 2 dimensions. So we look at like a scorecard over 3 years. What did you do on your business result? What happened to the people you were developing? So I think one of the things is, like you say, don't look at these as things which is outside of what you do normally. Just get them integrated, and find a way that you can't escape. You have no choice to be faced with it. And then I think as a company, you need to be very strict on who gets promoted. If you're serious about people development, you can never promote leaders who is not good at developing people, because the moment you do that, you basically tell we're not serious about it. And then I think the opportunities comes back. And in our company, one of the best people developers we ever had, he's basically doing with his people what books tells you sort of not to do. And I mean, if you look at the CVs, you wouldn't hire them, because these people have, over 18 months been all over the place. Because if he had a problem, he would pick his best talents and just put them on it. And they find a way of solving it. So I think a lot of creating exposure in the normal business, because that's where you learn the most. And if you use the 70-20-10 model, you always can get to the 70. The question, I think, for us is to find ways that in the 70%, you add on these reflection pieces.
Yes.
I think companies, we're too busy on letting them do stuff, and it's more up to yourself to reflect and draw the learning out of it. And we're not necessarily good at passing that learning over to others. And I think with the generation growing up now, I think that game is probably going to change.
Okay. You look like you're
No, I'm
ready
just, it is so true. I guess I've been working with a couple corporate clients, and they're saying, I guess the comment was, right, that, look, we're not putting people on these long-term international assignments, but what we are finding is that we can pull a lot of value out of the things we're doing anyhow. So just had this conversation with someone from 3M a couple days ago, and they said, look, we're not putting people on planes even to travel for work. But when we do, we give them additional time so that they can have significant peer-level interactions with their colleagues and really embed more learning out of it, more reflection out of the experiences that they're having anyhow. And I think that might be a way to get, develop people while also executing on strategy. So.
okay. I want to thank the three of you for your thoughts this afternoon. And we're close to the end of the panel. I want to give each of you an opportunity to provide one final thought or perspective, perhaps that might have grown out of this conversation, or something that, as you've been reflecting today, might be your own personal takeaway or your own personal insight that you have acquired. I have to let the audience know this was panel was not prepared for that question. But so anybody want to go first?
I guess I'll take
Go
it
ahead,
first.
Dave.
So I guess, for me, as we talk about this, I think that you've mentioned simplicity quite a few times, Eivind. I think that the aha for me is that it's not necessarily about global leadership, it's really about leadership, and it's about talent. And when I think about that, I think about a few things. I think about things like the upfront time that we spend with people as leaders. And I can recently, this is on my mind, because I recently spent the last several weeks going around the country for a second time to meet with every single leader in our organization, in our operations groups, to meet with them for a second time to do a very simple thing, which is to say to them, okay, 10 weeks ago you told me this is what you wanted and needed, this is where your business is going. I'm coming back to you now to say, here's what I recommend, and I need your support. And that literally was a, press in flesh, eye to eye, sit down, break bread, have coffee. In one case, I had a meeting canceled on me, and I basically had to sort of stay in the office and say, I'm not leaving until we have this meeting, right? But the point is that face-to-face, that one-to-one, solidified, in a sense, that relationship. And then we could move on to strategy, tactics, and just last week, on Cape Cod, we had our senior leadership meeting where I basically said to everyone, I had an hour to present the same thing, and I said, we just did this over the last 2 weeks, so what do you guys want to talk about? And then we debated a few things, and we had a good discussion, and I said, are you guys all ready to sign up? And they said, absolutely. But if I hadn't done that upfront piece, that meeting would have been harder to go to. So I think that we, maybe it's just so simple we all forget about it, but I think that's a really important part of being in a global organization, a national organization, and then we can do the cool thing, right, which is let technology help us. We can Skype because we know people, right? We can use Link if you're a Microsoft, shop. I found that 1-2 punch works really well.
Eivind?
I think for me, it's more the less is more. but whatever you choose for, stick to it. Because I think the problem is you start with something and then you move on to something else. And I think as leaders, we always like to do something new, which is fresh, versus sticking to something and pulling it through when it gets boring, because that's what we've been doing for a long time. And then rather use your creativity to make it, refresh it how you do, but you stick to the same thing, because then I think you become predictable for people. And I think also in a remote setting, you need a certain rituals to relate to build that trust that keeps you going. So whatever it is, it works for you, but then find a way and then stick to it and not change it all the time.
Hey, Paula, we started with you first, and we'll finish with you.
I think for me, my aha was this issue around, the investments that you said we don't have to spend a lot of money to do some things well, but we do have to do some things better. So on the training side, there's tips and tricks and things that we could be offering our global leaders and our leaders who have to work virtually that will make them great. I mean, things as basic as look in the camera when you're having a Skype meeting. I beg of you, it makes the person on the other end feel as though you're making eye contact. Now, that took all of about 30 seconds to say, but it can make all the difference in helping people build trust. So simple things that I think we could be doing to help our leaders get better through training. And then I think when we are going to invest in developmental opportunities, that we do it well, and that we don't necessarily assume that it has to be that big, expensive international assignment for someone to really get great at this. It doesn't. It could be the things they're doing anyhow.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you as an audience.